Huh. Now we're cooking, I think. Are we cooking? I think we're live. Had a little bit of a mishap there, and also I just realized, guys, that I left one of my tripods up north on a trip that I was on recently. So sorry for the late start. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Rebel, and we are on the I Love Jeet Kune broadcast number 18. This is the one about truth in Jeet Kune, and we're going to revisit the phase training from broadcast number 11, I think that was. So we're going to go off the technical or physical aspects of Jeet Kune and talk a little bit. I guess we could consider, and this is a really tricky topic for me. I guess we could consider truth in Jeet Kune to be Jeet Kune philosophy, right, or as such. So soft topic. So hang in there with me. One reason why I say it's tricky is because of the whole my truth versus your truth versus his truth thing. You know, I'm not sure yet what my ultimate decision is on that, whether or not there is such a thing as absolute truth, and then all the other truths are just your opinion, right, or your version of it, or what have you. So let me do the t-shirt thing. I'm wearing a jacket because it's freezing cold here in Miami. It's like 50 degrees. All right. So before we get too deep into this, let me ask you a question. What's your opinion on this whole idea of truth? You know, it comes up in Jeet Kune probably because of this thing right here, right? The whole truth in combat is different for each individual in this style. I was thinking about that literally right up until 5 minutes ago in preparation for coming live and, you know, spending time with you guys. The truth in combat is different for every individual in this style. That's what it says at the top of that well-known sign. Does that mean that every individual in this style is going to have a different truth? Or does it just mean that that singular entity, truth in combat, is different? So it's not the truth that's it. The truth is the one thing, but the individuals in the style, it's going to be different for them, but it's not that truth is different, right? So you understand, this is why this is a difficult, soft topic, right? Anyhow, so we'll get into it, right? So partially what prompted the discussion of this topic was a discussion with one of my Jeet Kune seniors, whose advice to me was to be careful that I didn't repeat and thereby perpetuate some of the classic myths that exist in Jeet Kune, which have been around for quite some time. So I won't give you details because it was a private conversation, but suffice to say that some of the things that we've been told or led to believe in Jeet Kune are not necessarily 100% accurate. Sometimes there's a little bit of embellishment, maybe, you know, for different well-intentioned reasons, right? But maybe to enhance someone's reputation or to give somebody a boost in somewhere. Maybe there's a little bit of embellishment on, you know, exactly what the true circumstances were, right? Something else that complicates the Jeet Kune debate also is that there's a lot of crossover, right? And by what I mean is, when we talk about different stuff, so if you've been listening and paying attention, then you may have noticed how there's more often than not, there's a connecting thread between all of the Jeet Kune topics, right? So last week we talked about mastery. Today we're talking about truth, but we're still making references to the 4 tenets of Jeet Kune, right? Which we made reference to when we talked about mastery. When we talked about the phase training, we probably made reference to the 4 tenets of Jeet Kune, right? So that's where we start. The truth in combat is different for every individual in this style. So it got me to thinking a lot about this idea of truth, right? Again, if people have been saying certain things in order to romanticize an era or to put forward a certain narrative, then to a certain degree we're being done a disservice, you know. So I say, let's go as much as possible, let's go to the original source, right? So the original source, for me, the original source was, it was reflected in the statement that Jeet Kune was the search for truth in combat reality, right? The search for truth in martial art training. So that's the thing that led me to California in 1983, and that's pretty much the thing that has kept me on the Jeet Kune path ever since, right? So if we take a look back at how Bruce Lee may have come up with this whole idea of the concept, you know, the idea of truth, right? If you look at what is portrayed in the photographs in Bruce Lee's first book, right, Chinese Kung Fu, The Philosophical Art of Self-Defense, you could say that it wasn't particularly combative, right? It was, or even realistic, as compared to what maybe 4 or 5 years later is depicted in Bruce Lee's fighting method, where now we've got equipment training, we've got protective gear training, and then even the scenarios, the offense and defense scenarios are all geared towards street fighting, right? So for those of you who don't have the single volume, right, that's volume 4, which is the self-defense techniques, right? So we have pictorial evidence, let's call it, of Bruce Lee's evolution in his search for truth, right? So we can see then that Bruce Lee himself was working real hard on his development, on let's call it developing his truth, right? Or realizing his truth. See, because you can't attempt to be honest with yourself in your training and continue to train unrealistically, right? So you can't say, well, let's pick on Shotokan like I like to, right? Doesn't mean that people in Shotokan can't fight, okay? But when they train together, they do train in a particular way, which is the Shotokan way. So within the realm of Shotokan, yeah, maybe everything works out. But outside of the realm of Shotokan, and that's the thing about Jeet Kune Do training. Jeet Kune Do training is to prepare you for the ultimate in combat reality. So that means anything that happens, your Jeet Kune Do training should be able to prepare you to handle it, right? So in Bruce Lee's era, I think the kicking and punching is probably the thing that was most prevalent, and so the training was structured to deal with the kicking and punching. In today's world, there's still kicking and punching. You know, when Sifu Dan came along, he kind of put an emphasis on the weaponry training also, which needed to be boosted somewhat, I guess. Today, it's still kicking and punching, but there's also the grappling because of the MMA and the UFC and what have you. So it's kind of like Burt Richardson and Eric Paulson, right? Or the two that I learned this from. If you get into something, always expect them to shoot in for the takedown. You know, Eric Paulson likes to say, if you're like this, and all of a sudden you can't see his eyes, you better drop your elevation quickly also, right? So if we're training realistically for the ultimate in combat reality, today we have to take the grappling method into consideration. So we have Bruce Lee's own evolution as our guidepost, right? As the example of how to search for truth, right? So we have his notes. So reference material for today's podcast is Jeet Kune Do, Bruce Lee's commentaries on the martial way, right? So pages 39 to 45 of this one. It's really cool, right? It's, if you see here on the, where is it? One day I'll have somebody overhead zoom in on this. But it says on the limitations of wrestling and judo, on the limitations of Thai boxing, even on the limitations of street fighting. And then there's a section, how to deal with various arts, right? A question to ask. What are their most favorite techniques, right? Western boxing, Thai boxing, karate, taekwondo, wrestling, judo. And then he has a list here of the pros and cons, right? So the pros and cons of Western boxing, of wrestling, of karate, of taekwondo, of judo, pros and cons of Thai boxing, all right? And then even Kung Fu styles. So in his notes, therefore, Bruce Lee was dissecting, let's say, or deconstructing in an effort to come out on the other side, understanding what the high points of a particular approach to fighting might be, and then also what the low points are, right? But it goes deeper, because in further on in pages 136 and 137. So if you guys have this book, not right now, but you know, later on, if you're reviewing this, you can take a look at what we're talking about, right? There's a whole section here entitled grappling and throwing, right? So it says grappling and throwing factors that all martial artists should consider. Now, this is before MMA. This is before 1993, right? I mean, Bruce Lee passed away in 1973. So this is more than 20 years before UFC 1. And Bruce Lee is talking about grappling and throwing factors that all martial artists should consider. So, number one is grappling and throwing as an attack, right? Dig this, right? This is pretty cool. Then grappling and throwing as counters, right? So, attack, grappling and throwing as counter. Then it says grappling and throwing and hitting / kicking, or vice versa, as attack. So he's talking about stand up and ground, or striking and grappling as attack. Then grappling and throwing and hitting / kicking, or vice versa, as counter, right? So then counter to grappling / throwing against a right stancer, which means somebody who's in a right lead, and then counter to grappling or throwing against a left stancer, right? And then there's a section there on the training aid. Now, Kurt's asking if all the books have been shown available for sale. Yes, Kurt, there's a thing called Amazon. I'm being a smartass. Yes, all of this stuff. This is, you've heard me talk about this before. This is all part of the John Little library. So let me tangent off here for a second and talk to Kurt. So everybody will tell you, oh yeah, I've read the Tao of Jeet Kune Do. All right, well listen, maybe back in 1977, that was it, right? Or then people will tell you, well, yeah, I've read Bruce Lee's other book, Bruce Lee's Fighting Method. Okay? Well, yeah, but Jeet Kune Do is an ever-evolving process, people. So we can't stick to just the and even if you're a purist, right? If it's like, well, I don't want to read anything in Jeet Kune Do that wasn't written by Bruce Lee. All right? Okay. Well, Bruce Lee couldn't write anything after 1973, but thank God John Little got access to the Bruce Lee library, and so now we have the John Little series. I'm looking on the other side of the room here. Little's got maybe about 13 books on Bruce Lee. So definitely, Kurt, they're worth looking into, right? So to get back to what we were talking about here. Bruce Lee is talking about grappling as an attack, grappling as a counter. So remember, at the beginning of the broadcast, I told you that there's always these elements of crossover in whatever it is that we're discussing, right? All these Jeet Kune Do topics. So you might remember, I forget how many broadcasts ago it was, but we were talking about the concept of learn the technique, practice the technique, put it into the flow, add the counter, add the recounter, right? You guys might remember that. Coincidentally, see, when I was reading this in doing the research for today's show, I realized that that's what that particular training, even though that's something I thought we got from the Filipino Kali, but maybe we did, maybe we didn't. But obviously, it's connected to what Bruce Lee was talking about here, right? So everything that you do. So if you're a kick punch person, if you're a kickboxing person, then you have to study how to use your kickboxing against grappling. If you're a grappler, you got to study how to use your grappling against kickboxing. You can't just go kickboxing versus kickboxing, grappling versus grappling, and necessarily say that you are covering all of the probabilities or possibilities in combat reality. Does that make sense? See, so that's what, so truth in combat, that's what that is about. It's about consciously preparing yourself for what it is that could occur, right? That's what truth in combat is. So one of the difficulties that comes up, see, is because if somebody advertises a Jeet Kune seminar, and you attend a Jeet Kune seminar, and it is a highly respected, well-regarded, influential instructor, the seminar material that you receive, since everything was advertised as a Jeet Kune seminar, you have to assume that what you are getting therefore is Jeet Kune, because otherwise everything's a fraud, right? So one of the difficulties that is presented in that seminar format then is that what you get at the seminar a lot of times is a result of somebody's blend of things. You see? So if you're on the receiving end and you get that blend of techniques, then it can be I was almost going to say it can be forgiven, but no, it's not forgiven. It's well understood if you assume that blend of stuff is the Jeet Kune Do, right? So some people end up thinking that what they have to do is to copy exactly what they saw on the seminar, right? Sometimes it's an ego thing, because they're thinking that if they look just like the guy who's teaching the seminar looks, then that means that they are closer to the truth, right? Because they're moving just like that guy. And there's nothing wrong to a certain degree, because I've talked about this before, in emulating the people who influence you. So in my early days, I tried to look like a combination of Dan Inosanto, Ted Lukai, Chris Kent, and Tim Tackett, until I met Chai Surasut. And then I had to, then when it came to the Thai boxing, I tried to be him also. And I don't know if I ever told you guys this, but I did have a conversation with Sifu Dan about that. And he said, yeah, it's okay to try to copy somebody if that person's form, right? That person's technique is considered to be the epitome of good form and good technique. But ultimately, after that period of trying to copy somebody, you're going to come up with your own way of doing things. But in the beginning, maybe. But it's just that this idea that people, look, here's an example, right? I know for a fact that there are people who went, the first time they saw the late Ted Wong, right? Great Jeet Kune Do guy. When they saw Ted Wong, they were like, oh man, Ted Wong's got to be better at Jeet Kune Do than everybody else because his footwork is just like Bruce Lee's. That's what some people actually thought. The first time I saw Ted Wong, I thought, wow, that guy must have really worked his butt off in training in order to develop that kind of footwork. Had nothing to do with, because some of it he looked like Bruce Lee, so he must be the best at Jeet Kune Do. That's ridiculous, right? Because that's not what's true. That's not what's real. But obviously what was real is that Ted Wong trained his butt off. So the takeaway from that would be train hard like Ted Wong did, right? Talk to Ted Wong, attend the seminar, make your notes, talk to Ted Wong, find out what the heck it is that he did in training, and then go back home and do the same thing, right? See, because that's another thing about the seminar material. When you go home, you have to critically analyze it or analytically critique it, right? So it's kind of like deconstructing. So you go to the seminar, you get the end product, you get the end result. When you go home, you have to take that end product and disassemble it for yourself, right? Break it down into its component parts and then put it back together, build it, rebuild it, but in your own way. Now, when you rebuild it, it might be very, very close to whatever it is that your instructor gave you, or it might be a little bit different because of who you are, right? So the reverse engineering part, right? That's it. And look, here's the truth. None of this is necessarily easy. You know, Cass Magda and I talk all the time about how Jeet Kune Do is a transcendent art. So none of this is a piece of cake. And if it was a piece of cake, then everybody would be out there eating it, right? Jeet Kune Do presents, the true Jeet Kune Do approach presents, I don't want to say problems, right? But maybe problems is the word, for regular people. The people who get on the Jeet Kune Do path and stay on the Jeet Kune Do path are not regular people, not at all. They're extra crispy, right? It's a Kentucky Fried Chicken joke. Okay, all right, so that's my little treatise there on truth in Jeet Kune Do. Now, to revisit the phase training. So this was broadcast number 11. So this was like, what, 2 months ago or something. And it's the one about the 4 phases of Jeet Kune Do. If you guys have not seen that, I think they're all collected in the video section of the I Love Jeet Kune Do page, right? So it was reported to me that in the broadcast, I had said something about phase 3 or phase 4 being about learning or performing more complex flow drills. So I guess, like, let's say, if you guys are familiar with the Kali Sambrata drills, right? There's a 3-count drill and then there's a 5-count drill. So I guess maybe somebody, what they were thinking is that maybe what I was saying was like, maybe you make up an 11-count drill or a 13-count drill. So I want to apologize if I misled anybody into thinking that, because nothing could be further from the truth. The idea of more complex flow drills, I tried to find exactly what it was that I said so that I could, but I didn't have the time to go through, you know, the 45-minute broadcast. So let me try to clarify that. It's not more complex flow drills. It is using the flow drill in a more complex way. You see? So let's see. The jab drill, for example. The jab drill, for those of you who know what I'm talking about, I can start or my partner can start. So I jab, I catch his jab, and I re-jab, right? Now, after my re-jab, if we're training something where I am all offensive, so now after my second jab, I start following on with stuff. That's one approach. But if we're doing it where it's a counter-offensive, so now I jab, he re-jabs and I catch it. Now when I jab him, he works against my jab. So that's still one simple flow drill consisting of one technique, the jab, but look at all the things that could come out of it. Because I could follow my jab with boxing combinations. I could follow my jab with kickboxing combinations. I could follow my jab with trapping stuff. I could follow my jab with grappling stuff, and on and on and on. Likewise, on the other end, he can work against my jab using all that stuff, if that makes sense to you, right? So I didn't mean to imply that we had to create longer sequences of flow drills. What I meant to say, or meant to imply, is that we have to use the flow drills in more creatively intensified ways. In other words, bring up the difficulty level. Because remember that in phase 3 and 4, right? So I'm going to read here from Chris Kent and Tim Tackett's Jeet Kune Kickboxing. Phase 3 is concerned with the elimination of known weaknesses, the correction of faults, stabilization of the newly acquired skills and abilities, and the engagement in sparring, right? Now, I'll close with this one thing. I had said that in all my notes, I don't have any written material for what phase 4 is. And so for the purposes of teaching here in Miami, we called phase 4 to be freelance, right? Meaning that the sparring or any type of freelance drill occurs for us in phase 4. And then phase 3 is where the flow drills, like I just described about the jab, occur. Because that phase 3 flow drill thing is the closest thing, or can be developed to such a high level, that it is the closest thing to free sparring, right? So that's why we use that in phase 3. So that's it for today. One thing more. I just remembered this. In 1982, Sifu Asano conducted an experiment. I don't know if it was a well-publicized experiment or whatever, but at that time he had 2 training establishments. And this is how I recall, this is the story to the best of my recollection, okay? Now, I wasn't there, so don't take my word for it. Do your research on this. But it was 1982, and the experiment was at one training establishment, they focused on sparring. On the other at the other training establishment, they focused on realistic drilling. And then the two came together and they had like this sparring competition or sparring workout or what have you. I'd never seen any published results, right, of that experiment, but I do recall asking him if there was a huge disparity in the ability levels between the group that had sparred and the group that had trained in drilling. And he said no, there was not a huge disparity. So even though, as any of the legitimate Jeet Kune Do people will tell you, sparring is the end all or be all or whatever, or the crucible, it is the ultimate testing ground, right? And so sparring has to be part of your search for truth in combat reality, right? But don't ignore everything else that has to come up, right? As part of your ultimate ability to spar and benefit from the sparring, right? So sometimes, you know, people are in a hurry to get to the sparring and they don't have basic command of their techniques because they didn't spend enough time in phase 1 developing their coordination or what have you, right? Okay, so that's it, guys. Thanks to everybody who chimed in. Kenny, Adrian, Jason, Kurt, Carlos, right? I'm glad to see that you guys are like the regulars, you know. I hope you're continuing to enjoy the broadcast. Be sure to check out the Quick Skill series at ilovejeetkundo.com, and comments and ideas, suggestions for different Jeet Kune Do topics for upcoming broadcasts are always welcome and appreciated. Everybody have a good day. This is Dwight Woods, the Jeet Kune Do Rebel, signing off.